Hello, this is a video that we've made which is designed to help students get to grips with referencing, understand what the purpose of referencing is, understand what information is needed to do this magical thing called referencing, and then some help and tips on how to do it more efficiently and effectively. If you're at the start of your studies, then this will be slightly overwhelming possibly, and it all seems very magical and unknown. And then as you start to progress through your studies, you'll start to become much more used to it, and you'll understand exactly why it's so important and how to do it, and I can promise you that it will get much easier. There's lots of content, and this video is also accompanied by other resources, and I'd encourage you to look through whatever speed you want, go backwards and forwards, and then to engage with some of those other resources. And the more time you can spend in trying to improve your skills, the better you'll find it and the more efficient it will become. But for now, I'm going to start looking at the slides, and I hope you enjoy watching this video. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to think about what referencing is. So referencing is about how we build on previous research and science, and in the first stages of our undergraduate studies, this is really about how do we locate the right types of literature, how do we filter them and choose the right sources to underpin our writing. Then how do we synthesize them or integrate them into our own story, our own narrative. As we start to do more and more of our own research, as we go through undergraduate and into postgraduate as well, then we'll be starting to add value to that. We'll be starting to add our own insight. Throughout our studies, we may also be reflecting on our own practice and then integrating that with literature. And the process of referencing and citations within the literature allows you, the student, or us as the researcher, the academic. It's exactly the same, whatever stage we're at, but it allows all of us to communicate the fact that we've read this body of work, we understand this body of work, we can offer critical insight into how that body of work informs our practice, and then we can add value to that as well. So what you see on the screen is, on the left you see the text, the written text, and within that there are some citations. So there we go, they're all about in the middle there, aren't they? So there are some citations. So the author has made some points, and those points have been backed up with the writing of others. Now there's lots of subtleties around how this is done, and I'll try and cover some of them. But one of the best tips I can give you is to read more academic work, because then you'll start to take on board the methods with which people integrate references and the different ways that you can use them. On the right hand side you'll see the reference list, which is the section at the end of a piece of writing where we list all of the references. And what you'll see in a piece of academic writing is within the text you'll see a number of references, and then in the reference list at the end we need to see all of the same number of references in the reference list at the end. We don't want to see less than what's in the text, neither do we want to see more than what is in the list. It should be the same sources that are in there. This is about acknowledging the sources, and it's about informing the reader of the quality, the choice and quality of the type of sources that you've used. And the key concept is that we're not just plucking facts and assumptions out of the air and putting them down on the page, but the content, the main heart of our content that we've written is based on previous research, previous thinking by people that have done lots of training and thinking in that space. So as was once been said, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. This piece of work that I've produced is in addition to the fact that I've read everything. That's what referencing is. Why is it important? So it is important that all students understand the relevance of referencing, because it can really easily feel like it's just another academic burden. It's just something that's been made up, and that it's so precise and annoying, and it's just there to annoy people that are trying to produce work, but it's there for really good reasons. So as a general reader, I've already covered a few reasons. As a lecturer, there are also it also tells me something about the quality of the work. And there's a small game I'll play with myself when I'm marking work, and that is it's not a game, it's part of the marking process. I'll look at the reference section first of all, and the type of references, the way that it's been presented, and the number of references, will often be one of the first things that contributes to the grade that I'm going to give the piece of work. Now, it is possible to have all of those things in place and still not produce a very good piece of work, but it's fairly rare, and the quality and quantity of the reference list is normally fairly well matched to the quality of work as well. So it's good to be aware of that. We need to know you've engaged with a wide range of up-to-date sources. We need to be able to find and check those sources to see if that they've been used appropriately, and we can check for the accuracy of the information. And then also this is to do with originality. So you need to acknowledge the sources so that we know where they came from, and you start to push into realms of plagiarism and lacking originality if you're including large tracts of text which are from a textbook or a journal article and you've not acknowledged that. So you shouldn't be producing large amounts of it anyway, but any amount you need to acknowledge where you got your information from. If you look to the grade descriptors on any course, the generic grade descriptors, you'll see there are certain things that we will look for in all assessed work. And in terms of the use of references and the engagement with literature, these are some of the key points that I've picked out, which show the progression through the various different grading bands. So you can see right at the top of the scale there, almost, the exceptional work that we see would demonstrate a thorough critical understanding of current knowledge. So in order to demonstrate that, you need to show where that current knowledge has been embedded within your own work. If we go down to the other end of the scale, then we see demonstrates some. So that's it's a slightly pejorative sum. It's a very generous sum. Demonstrates some evidence of reading, weaknesses in organisation and presentation. So if there is barely any evidence of reading, if there's not that many references and it's not presented well, then that starts to tick the box for the weaker work grades. And you can see there's various shades of that in between. So this is relevant to the type of grades you get, but the reason that it's relevant is because this is part of the training that we're providing, and these are the top of the standards that we expect in higher education. Okay, so there's a task coming up, and what I'd like you to do, if you'd like to pause the video, then it'd be a great idea, or after the video, but you can pause the video now, find one journal article or several journal articles and skim through them, through a few sources, and look at how the referencing has been done. Where is it in text? Where is it in the reference section? So I'll leave you for a second just to think about that. Okay, now you've had a look at those, you can now think about when it's appropriate to reference. If I put these phrases up on the board, not all of them are fantastic text to have in an essay, but they're the type of comments that students will make. So obesity is a huge problem. There is widespread acceptance of discrimination against women in sport, and most people don't do enough sport. The reason I put these examples on the screen is because these are the type of statements which are statements of fact. They suggest that you know something and that you're reporting something as being a fact. These are exactly the type of references, or the type of phrases rather, which really demand some sort of underpinning reference. You'll get lecturers, tutors writing next to them, how do you know? Where is this from? Reference needed, citation needed. Not every single phrase in your text needs a citation, an in-text reference to other literature, but these are exactly the type of phrases which do need that. If you look through published work, one thing you can do is look at the spread. How often are there citations included? What type of phrases are typically accompanied by a reference? Some of the guidelines. Key ideas which are not your own. So if we're talking about big concepts that sound like it's a statement of fact and it's an idea that is an indisputable truth, then or possibly an arguable truth, then you need to start including a reference on that. We need to be able to, if you're reading something and you think, well, that's interesting, I want to go and find out more, then that's when another reason why you need to include the references. And then similarly, I've already touched on the fact that if you're including lots of reference to other work or the thoughts of other people, but you're not referencing them, that's unfair on them. But also it suggests it's not appropriate to take those ideas as your own. You need to be referencing them as well. So they're all slightly different reasons why we need to get our head around referencing. So far, I haven't talked about style at all, or the way of doing it. But Plymouth Marjon University have adopted what's known as the APA referencing style. That's the American Psychological Association, but we can forget the fact that it's psychological. This is one of the most widely used referencing styles in the world. This is not specific to Marjon. As an organisation, we need to choose one style so that all students can be supported appropriately in the use and the development of their own skill in producing references and using references. So we need to have an institutional style, but the APA style, the choice of the APA style, because it's a globally recognised style, what you'll see slightly later is that there are there's loads of advice online, loads of different resources from different people who've come at it from different angles and produced different resources that you might be able to engage with in a different way. But similarly, there are reference generators, there's software, there's websites which use APA as one of their main styles, which makes the process a lot easier. So the Marjon support that you can see on the page there and some of the links that will accompany this video are there for you from us to help you develop skills in using APA style. But you can also just Google APA 7th, which is where we are now, because there's been slightly different iterations of it. So you can just Google that, or you can look at the packages that we've put together to support you, and you can find the answers to the questions that you may have. And I've been using it for ages, but I still have some crib sheets next to me, and I'll still be looking up little bits where I can't quite remember where they go. Generally speaking, I know how to do the referencing. I know how to fit it into my text. I know loads of the rules, which is what you'll develop. But there are still bits that I need to reference. So knowing where these help pages are is really helpful. And there you can see a link to it, and I'll accompany this video with a link as well. Here's another task. What I'd like you to do is to think about, by looking at some references, is to think about what's the actual information that we need to have at our disposal in order to create a reference. And I'll leave you for a minute to pause the video and think about that. So hopefully you've had a think about the type of information that you think should be in a reference, and I'm going to give you some of my thoughts on that. So we need to think about what the type of source is. Is it a book? Is it a journal article? Is it a newspaper? Is it a website? You need to know what it is. And even within a book, there are slightly different types of book as well, and that matters for the referencing. We need to know the author's names. This is probably the most important thing, right alongside the date of publication. That gives us a perspective when we're reading a piece of work as to how contemporary the evidence is that this piece of work has been built on. Knowing the author's name. Also, as you progress in your topic, you'll also become more familiar with some authors, and some authors certainly have quite clear standpoints where they come from in certain academic discourse, and so you'll be able to understand the perspective of where that person's coming from, what's gone before them. But we need to know who's produced that work and when it was produced. Similarly, the title of the work, if it's in a journal, what the journal title is, who published it if it was a book, and then some of the numbers as well to identify that piece of work, and that will become clearer as we look forwards and we look at some of the different sources. Right at the start of this video I talked about the two places where we start to see referencing. One is in text and one is in the end in a reference section. So what I'm going to address now is those in-text citations. So that's what this next section is on. If you want to pause now you can, or you can keep going and I'll show you how to do it in text. So an in-text citation is those references built into the narrative of the text that we're reading, or it could be on a slide if you're doing a presentation. Similar rules apply. But you can see here on this example, there are two separate paraphrased indirect quotes. And the first one says, according to Bramham and Hilton, 2008, sports development is difficult to define and there are competing definitions of it. And then there's another type which says studying more effectively involves taking a number of practical steps, brackets, Barnes, and that needs a full stop just after Barnes and the bracket. What you see there are indirect quotes. There is no speech marks. There is no direct sense of a phrase being taken and embedded. This implies that the writer of this piece of work has read a piece of work, understood it, and then paraphrased it and put it into their own writing. You can see two ways of doing this. The first is that the author's names have been included in the paragraph, and for that sentence, rather, not paragraph, for that sentence to work, I need to read out the names of the authors. So according to Bramham and Hilton, sports development is difficult to define and there are competing definitions of it. I did not read out 2008, but the sentence still makes sense. Similarly, studying more effectively involves taking a number of practical steps. The idea of what goes in the brackets depends on whether you want to say those words, the author's name, in the sentence or not. So those are two different methods of paraphrasing or using indirect quotes within your own text. In most published work, this is the method that is predominantly used. Often we see students who think that referencing is taking direct quotes, and it's really obvious that the piece of work has often been produced by sewing together lots of different direct quotes, and the direct quotes go in, and then the joining words and the words of the writer go in between them. If you look at most published work, nearly all published work, you'll see that is not the case. Most referencing is indirect and is about alluding to ideas from different people, paraphrasing them, putting them into your own words, giving them context. It's your piece of work that's built on the findings of others. It's not their work sewn into yours, generally speaking. You don't need to use page numbers when you do this. And then there starts to become some rules in APA style, which are built around how many authors there are. So for one or two authors, you name them. If you've got their name in the sentence, then we use and, so Bramham and Hilton. However, if there's two in the paragraphs, in the parenthesis, then they would have an ampersand, an and shape next to them. And I think that'll do for now. That's the in-text. That's the most common way of referencing. Sometimes, however, it is appropriate to use some direct quotes. So if your author has said something which is particularly pertinent, and it's important that it was linked with that person, and that person is linked with the exact phrase, then we can use their words. We can cite them directly. You can see here two examples. So black waterproof Indian ink is the first choice of most illustrators. That was by Morris et al. So that would be 3 or more authors. There's a date, and then crucially there is the page number. So when we use direct quotes, we need to use the page number that it's come from. There's a slightly different version in the next line, which uses the author's name in the text, so it's therefore not in parenthesis, but apart from that it's broadly speaking the same. So page numbers are needed. What you can see on the board is really just a phrase, like half a sentence, although in my example it's a whole sentence, but in the top one. But it's the most common way of using this is to have just 4 or 5 words and have that direct phrase incorporated into your own sentence. So you might provide the words for the rest of the sentence. It is possible to use longer quotations, but those need to be indented, and we'll look at an example of that in a minute. And you do need to be cautious of overusing this, as I've already identified. But this is a perfectly reasonable way of referencing. What you can see on the board on the screen are different examples of the same method. So direct referencing, direct citation, direct quoting, and you can see that all of these are broadly the same sentiment, but they're slightly different. But the common theme is that there's speech marks involved, and the page number is always included. But yet you can see there's flexibility in how this is done. When you start to look at different sources in different books, you'll see there are different referencing styles. There are some that include numbers in the text, and those numbers refer to the referencing at the end. There are some that have names in the text, but yet sometimes the way that they're presented is slightly different in some of the rules. APA is really average, is popular, really good method to use. But you'll see some of the variations if you start to look at text. These variations on the board are all APA, except there is a flexibility in how we use these direct quotes or include direct quotes. If you start to use a direct quote which is more than 40 words, these should also really be used very sparingly and occasionally overused. There are slightly different ways of doing this, but the main points you can see on the board above on the screen, and you can see the common themes that we've already looked at. We can see the author's name is included. Now we could put the page number in here, but what we see on this method, which is one way of doing APA, there is an indent. So that means that this is indented more than where the normal text would be, and also on the other side. And there's our page number down the bottom. You can see there's no speech marks, but that's because the work has been indented, and it'll be quite clear that this is a passage from another author. You might be thinking that this is way too much now, but there's lots and lots of guidance in some of the books that I'll point you towards. There's some quick guidance as well, and at the early stages of learning how to do referencing, we're just about raising awareness of these are different ways of doing referencing, and then it can become slightly difficult to do at the start, but then once we start to learn the rules, this becomes much easier. When we're citing work, we need to think about how many authors there are. And you can see on this table, which is drawn from the margin guidance, or the margin document on the APA guidance, the type of citation can be, the number of authors can have an impact on the way that we present it. So what you see on the board on this table is this is something that's worth printing off. This is worth having by the side of your desk when you're doing your work. So what we see across the first two columns is these are in text citations. They're all in text citations. These are parenthetical. These are the ones where we use the parenthetical. These are the ones where we use the brackets, and we don't want to say the author's name in the sentence to make it make sense. But the first two, in text, are non-parenthetical. These are the ones where we want to say the author's name in the text. And what you can see as we move down the columns, down the rows, is about how many authors there are. So the first row is if we just have the one author, and you can see across there how to present it, pretty straightforward. Two authors, you can see there's an and in there, and there's an ampersand on that side once we put it in brackets. By three or more authors, you can see that we use et al all the time, and that's the same whether it's in brackets or not. Then we come on to groups, and you can see there's some guidance there about how we can use groups when we present work. Okay, I'm going to stop for a task now where you can pause the video, and I'll just stop for 10 seconds to give you the space. What I'd like you to do is to look for these in-text citations, to identify some textbooks and journal articles, and then for each of the sources, locate some of those in-text citations. And if you sit with 3 or 4 across your desk, or you're talking to someone else while you do it, look at how they're done differently, in different ways. Look at which ones do use APA and how that works, but also look at different ways of referencing. This is not to try and confuse you, but it's to try and show you some of the common themes as well as the differences between different styles. So I'll leave you for a few seconds where you can pause the video and do this task if you wish. Okay, the next task that I'm going to leave you to do, if you're trying to spend some time developing your abilities, knowledge, skills and abilities in this space, would be to produce 2 in-text citations. So taking a source that you've read recently, and maybe a task that you've been working on or that you've been tasked with, what I'd like to do is to produce a few sentences which use those sources within the sentence. So we want you to synthesize that work, that research, into your own work. Ideally, have a go at using some of the different styles, possibly like some of the slides. Take one one thing that you're trying to say, as I'm trying to say this now, take one point that you're trying to make and then try and present that in slightly different ways using some of the different citation methods. And I'll leave you to think about that. Okay, so far what we've looked at is what's the point in doing referencing? And then we've just spent some time looking at the in-text citations, the rules that we need to follow when we're in and among our own writing. What I'd like to give now is some time to thinking about how we present things in the reference list. And again, there's a few more rules which can seem quite daunting when we're starting, but get used to over time. So your reference list is the list of sources that you've used in your text. We don't want to be losing any more, and we don't want to be presenting any less than what we've used in our text. So it's quite important as part of the editing process that we do check back and cross-reference, and there's some tricks to doing that, but the actual process is something that you need to make sure that you're thinking about and checking at various different points of producing work. The reference list should go at the end of your essay, should go on a different page, and if you put references at the top as a title, then our Turnitin system works best when you submit it, but also this is the rules of submitting a good piece of work. So new page, references at the top, and then it should be an A to Z ordered by the first author's surname list. Each citation, each included reference should be slightly indented. It should have a hanging indent, and we'll look at those in a second. What that means is that if it goes on to 2 lines, the second line is just budged in slightly. That means that it's much easier to read, and this is not just for us as tutors when we're marking work, but it's for you as someone that is producing work as well. It's much better if there's a clear reference list that you can look through, if it's all presented well, than to go back and cross-reference your reference list against your content. It's much easier if you can see it better. So alphabetical order, hanging indent for that second line, space in between each one, each entry, and it will look really nice and clear. They also need to be well presented, so there are some rules to follow. You need to, in effect, have good attention to detail while you're doing it, and there are some rules to follow. So we'll look at some of those rules now. In the reference list at the end of your piece of work, there's a difference between the type of source that you're using and the way and the type of information that we include and the way that it's presented. It can seem quite daunting to start with, but once we get used to it, then it makes more sense. And there are really, for most people, most of the time, just 2 or 3, probably 3 or 4 different sources that we'll use predominantly in the work. It's a good place to start with books. So a textbook or any type of book that we use will look something like this. We present the author's name, the initials, the year, the title of the book needs to be in italics, and if it's got a colon and a second clause to the sentence or to the title, then that second part will start with a capital letter. So it's like another sentence. There'll be a full stop, and then we name the publisher. So that's all of the information we need to be able to go off and find that book, which is the purpose of including references at the end and the purpose of having certain rules as to how we present that work. One of the reasons to having rules to the way we present our references is so that it's consistent throughout. That's a book. It starts to get a bit more complicated with multiple authors, which is what we saw when it was in text as well. And so for a single author, well, you can see this is a journal rather than a book. It's a bit annoying. But you can see for a single author, so if I focus in on the author part, we present the author's name and the surname. When we have 2 authors, then we use an ampersand in the middle in the reference section. When we have lots of authors, then in APA style, then we need to list all of those authors right up to the 20th. If we have 21 or more authors, then what we're going to do is list the first 19, and then we have an ellipsis, which is the 3 dots, and then the final author's name. So we'll miss out some of those people, 20 and beyond, 20 and beyond, and then we include the last author's name, and that's how we do it for books or for journals. Chapter in an edited book has two parts to it really, and what we can see here is we can see this is the author of the chapter, but these are the authors, or editors rather, of the book. So it's important that we give them both credit where it's due. Because it's a chapter in the book, we'll also include the page numbers of that chapter. What you'll also notice is that the editors' names, just to keep us on our toes, have been swapped around so that the initial goes first and then the surname goes second. Same rules apply in here for making sure that we use ands or ampersands. A journal article is one of the other most common ways that we'll will include some work, and the journal article you can see here includes all the authors' names, the year, the title of the article, go back a sec, the title of the journal, and then the volume number. So we'll look at a few examples as we go through. So you can see the first one is an example of what's needed. The authors' names, the date, the title of the article, and then the title of the journal. This is the issue number, and there's the page number. Increasingly, we use content that's online, and it is possible to include the URL. As a word of warning, the URL that should be included is not a random URL that you find online. It's not where someone's randomly posted it. It's not a ResearchGate. It's not an EBSCO number. It's not a library URL. The safest URL to use is what's known as the DOI, which is its descriptive code. It's like its registration plate. Now that DOI won't change even if the journal location changes. The DOI is fixed and is specifically for that article. And that DOI will signpost us to where the article lives. So that's the best URL to include if you're going to include one. And sometimes it's easier not to include any if you don't have the DOI. And there you go. Web sources such as newspapers or websites are on the board there, and you can see the APA 6, APA 7 style, whereas we need to give the author's name. We've got the year and the date, if there is a date, the name of the article, and then the title of the newspaper, and that should be in italic, which is not, and then the URL underneath. Similarly, websites can be are explained as such, and again, if we just email it, then we can Google it, then you'll see some advice on how to present the source that you're interested in. Your challenge now as a task is to produce a reference list. So get yourself 5 sources, and on the next page I'll pause it, and there are some sources, 4 sources, but you can use those and find them, and that would be a good searching task, or you can just find your own 4 or 5 sources and then try and make a reference list with those in. So hopefully you've made a nice neat reference list which is in alphabetical order and is everything in the right place. To do it by hand, where you pick out every piece of information from a book and type it in yourself, is really laborious, and that feels like that is referencing, but it's not referencing. We need an understanding of how to do it, but we don't have to write them out longhand. It's no shortcoming to have some shortcuts in how we do this. And people that have done it for longer and have learned how to be more efficient generally have several ways of doing this, and I'm going to take you through some of the ways that you can make this much less painful for yourself. The first way, and the way that I use the most, is to use Google Scholar. So if you look for items on Google Scholar, then you'll find just here in the search, when it comes back to you, if you click that, you'll get the site. There is APA style. If I click in there and I copy and paste that, then I can drop that. If I've got 2 screens or I can move between windows, I can literally drag that across, drop it into my work, and it's done. That is my reference list done. Now you can see on that example that BMJ is not quite written out properly, and you will find they're not 100% perfect, but it's still much quicker than writing them out yourself. So that's why you need to know how to do referencing, because you need to be able to spot where some of the errors are, but you don't have to be able to write it all out yourself. And I'd say the Google Scholar method is probably about 80% correct from scratch. So you might go on a bad run, but it is generally pretty good. There is a Google Scholar plugin which you can use. You can see just at the top next to the URL bar in that picture. So you can do that as well, and then you can search within Google Chrome as well, and that could be good for you. And it's up the top there. Discovery is the library's best search engine, and once you've found an article on Discovery, you can see there by using the on the right hand side I've circled it, you can see the Cite button. It will give you APA referencing, and then you can do exactly the same. You can copy and paste it out and stick it into your Word document. There's another way of doing it if you're in Discovery a lot. Similarly, there's software such as Cite This For Me, which allows you to log in, to save your citations, to find citations within Cite This For Me, and you may find that this is a good way of doing referencing for you. I think there might even be a plugin for Google as well, but you can have a play with that. Mendeley is another example, and there are other videos, and within these slides you might be able to find them elsewhere, but there are other videos that will show you how to do it. But Mendeley does citation management. Once you've stored your articles in Mendeley, and it works really well as a reference in managing software, you can then pair it up with Word, and they will all your references will magically appear in order. And if you've used them in text, then they'll turn up in your reference section. If you've not used them in text, they won't be in your reference section. It's a brilliant way of doing your referencing. It's a little bit fiddly to start with. Generally, students who've been doing it for a while understand the cost benefit of using Mendeley, and the students that are just starting out find it a little bit too complicated, but that's not to put you off. If the sooner you can get used to it, I can promise you that you'll save time in the long run. All of these methods I'll put together in another video that you might be able to find close to this one, and I'll spend a bit more time going through those methods. Similarly, there's some tricks to learn in Word or in Google Docs, whichever you use. And the first one is to clear formatting. Sometimes when you paste in a reference, then it will be in a different format. So there's different ways of pasting in so that you keep the formatting. There's also a way of clearing the formatting. Similarly, this magical A to Z button that you see in the top of the Windows ribbon is something that is not often seen. And if you highlight all of your references and they're all formatted appropriately and you press that button, it will put them into alphabetical order for you. So that can also be a bit of a time saver. Some related skills include how we find different sources, so using different databases, using Google Scholar, using Discovery, how we manage these files, and this information, something like Mendeley is really good for managing and searching within the things that we've brought together, and then how do we write more effectively and more academically and incorporate these references into our own writing. And there's some links associated with this video as well. So if you've got any questions, then I recommend you looking up the Marjon resources, but also just Google APA, see what you can find, get practicing, speak to your tutors, and there's loads of help around, and I hope you found this video useful.